Alright, so this is the 1-inch thick thermal spacer that kind of raises the supercharger up to make clearance for the 2 1/4 thick radiator core, the aftercooler core inside the manifold. Coming off a little tight. There it is. Alright, so next thing you're going to want to do here is take off your fuel injectors. Here's the fuel injectors clips and the harness, and moving that out of the way to the side. And then with the CTE kit, you just have these threaded posts that hold down the fuel rail. The stock configuration is there's a spacer and a nut that holds this down, but these are threaded spacers here, which attach the nice carbon fiber CTE fuel rail cover. So this is a 3/4 inch wrench, and just going to crack these loose. Unthread these. Alright, and you got these two off. You can see how they're threaded on the back side here. And these are the bolts for the CTE cover. So they just kind of act as nuts to hold down the fuel rail. Now the fuel rail, you can see, is all loose. The only thing you got to do now is disconnect the fuel line itself to the fuel rail. So you pull this little clip off, and then you pull this green tab back and slide the hose off. But before you do that, make sure you got a rag, stuff it up in there underneath. Fuel will spill. My recommendation is to try to tip this fuel rail up as quick as you can. Try to keep the injectors in the bottom of it so fuel doesn't spill out. There's quite a bit of fuel stored in this rail right now. So just be ready, expect fuel to come out, and have rags ready. Alright, so here is my rags. I'm going to slide this. No more fuel spills out of the line itself here. Clip it back into that little clip. And just hold your rag onto the end of the fuel rail and try to slowly pull up on the injectors, trying to keep them in the rail, or you're going to have a bigger mess. Make sure you got all the injectors staying with the rail. Once you got them all popped out, you can take this and tip it up like this. As you can see, I've got all my injectors here. No fuel is leaking because I made sure the injectors stayed in the fuel rail. Normally they'd have a clip securing them, but the grams don't require a clip. At least I didn't have the right clip to make that work. So I just pulled them off and was careful. So I mean, a clip's not really necessary because the bolts hold the fuel rail down. There's no way the injectors can kind of undo themselves. So that is how you take that out very easily. It says here's the fuel rail and the grams injectors. As you can see, I took one out already, cleaned it up a little bit. They ran great for me and haven't had a problem with them. So I'm just going to work on taking the rest out of the rail here. These do have the plug-and-play clips on them. So this little harness here adapts the injector to the standard 8th gen plug. So all you got to do is plug your factory connectors into these, and there's no splicing or anything required. It's just plug and play. Alright, so all the injectors are out. Here's a close-up of them all. Fuel rail's all plugged up, staying clean. Just want to point out one thing I noticed too with the CTE kit. But the height I had this rail set at was one of these thin black washers here, the spacers if you will, and then this is the standard length spacer CompTech includes, and then that goes right over the stud that's in the manifold. The stud won't come out, and neither will any of these 6 here. Those are all red Loctited into the manifold. So yeah, you got one black spacer that goes over there, and then the like 1/8 inch, probably 3/16 inch thick spacers goes on top of that, and that sets your fuel rail height. Alright, so this here is the driver's side AC bracket that holds the condenser on the upper part, the upper driver's side. I took one out already. I'll just show you how it kind of goes in there. It mounts behind. This here is the bracket that holds the aftercooler on the front. It's all connected. This cross beam sets your width. It's got a nut on the back of this socket head cap screw here, and then that factory 8th gen bracket is pinched in between these two, identical to this side. As you can see, you got your bolt head, you got a lock washer, your flat washer through the slot, and then in between the threaded part and the AC condenser and the bracket for the aftercooler itself is the bracket that holds it to the cross member that was taken out in the first step. That's the factory 8th gen cross member bracket that holds the AC condenser. Just to quickly look at routing, because it kind of gets tricky. Out of the top of the aftercooler, you have two lines that are going to be flowing coolant out of the cooler. One's an overflow, and that is a very small diameter silicone hose. I have that kind of wrapped around through this cavity here. This is a plastic shield that's from the factory. I had to trim that back a little bit to fit the two hoses down in there, but the hose that comes out of the top of the aftercooler radiator here up front is got a 90 degree. That I bought that separate from Advanced Auto Parts. It's a 90 degree because that bend is way too sharp to make with just the hose. It would pinch off all the flow. So I use that 90 degree bend there, and then the hose comes straight off of there through the same cavity right next to the headlight, in between this plastic shield, up around underneath the two radiator hoses, the fill neck and the return hose up top for the hybrid racing intake. And that went straight underneath both of those. As you can see, that's the routing. And then it plugged right into the aftercooler. It lined up perfect with the inlet to the aftercooler and the supercharger. And then the outlet of that was right here. That plugged into the supercharger outlet port, and that goes right back to the surge tank. And then the coolant overflow hose I was talking about, this is small diameter. It runs through this cavity, same cavity of that one. It's underneath it a little bit, and it runs underneath that up to here, and it connects back to the aftercooler surge tank. So that shoots coolant in there. Since the pressure builds up too high, it can't flow every single thing through this. So as the pressure builds higher, it starts to shoot coolant through here, so it doesn't over pressurize the system, and it just refills back into here. So you got coolant coming into this reservoir from the supercharger and from the overflow at the same time. And then from the bottom of the surge tank, there's another silicone hose that runs right down underneath the headlight here. It'd actually be nice to have another 90 degree fitting here. I had to use kind of a hose clamp to keep it from pinching itself shut on this bend here underneath the headlight, as you can see. But there is some room under there for this to clear, so it's not pinched there. Then there's the water pump right here in front of the hybrid racing air filter. This, I have a custom bracket made. I made two aluminum pieces myself that mount right back there. As you see, that's the bolt head right there that mounts through the factory hole next to the crash beam in the frame. There's two metal brackets there that I made that holds this clamp that holds the water pump. So that's actually very, very rigid. Then that's the fill from the water pump right there. Then out of the water pump, it shoots coolant out of this way, in front of the horn, and to the bottom of the front mount. So that's the routing for all the aftercooler. And of course there's the electrical plug down here that I have this nice conduit. Alright, so we got the two brackets off the top that hold the upper mount bracket for the aftercooler to the AC condenser. I put the brackets up on the desk. So now I'm going to take off the overflow hose here. So undo this little worm clamp. That pops right off. And then I'm going to take off the upper and lower hose to this here. And then I should be able to get out the cooler. Just pull it straight up. Working on taking the upper hose off now. There it is. Upper hose is off the aftercooler front mount. Alright, so for the bottom, I'm just going to take off this clamp on the bottom. As you can see now, it's really sagging because all the weight is on these brackets here. I'll move the hose out of the way. These two aluminum brackets here ride underneath the AC condenser. So I'm going to have to pull up on the AC condenser, or actually I can just slide these out. These have a little rubber grommet on it. If I take those out on each side, aftercooler core straight out the top. So the aftercooler mounts with these little aluminum pieces here. It's pretty clever the way it's designed. They mount underneath the AC condenser, so it's a hole like that with a little rubber grommet that goes through the front mount aftercooler, and then this is also included, this little adapter piece which goes from the AC condenser and fits the diameter of this. So I'm going to label this one for the passenger side with a Sharpie on it, and then this one with a Sharpie for the right side, the driver's side. Just so I don't get them confused when I put them back together. I think they're the exact same part, but just to be sure, I'm going to label which side they came off of. So here's a closer look at these little spacers here. They actually have a couple steps in them. One fits the diameter of the bracket, and then the next step down fits the diameter of the frame and the hole, and that's how these pieces work. I'm going to work on getting this one out of the bottom here. They just slide up into a pin, and they have a hole, and that's as easy as that. And then you just put your factory rubber ones back on there, and it'll drop right back into the frame. I'm going to take the hose clamp off so I can just yank this thing out. There you go. I got the hose off the overflow now. The next one is the top feed to the aftercooler inside the supercharger. I'm going to pull that up. And I'll take the clamp off the other side so I can slide it out freely. Just feed that through. Just like that. So it's tight squeeze, but it worked perfect. There you go. That's the this is the 90-degree from the top, the aftercooler core up front, and then this runs right to the supercharger. Alright, so next thing I'm going to do here is remove this upper hose to the surge tank. That's pretty simple. And then down there, underneath the surge tank, you see that nut right there, that's on top of the transmission. It mounts to an existing stud on the transmission. If you can see, there's a nut underneath the nut, and in between the two are the bracket for the surge tank. So I'm going to pop that top nut off and then pull the surge tank right out. There we go. Top hose is off. So I'm going to get on top of the nut now for the surge tank. It's a 17 millimeter. It's that bolt I got right from Honda. It's the same exact bolt in that location that mounts the transmission bracket. So just pulling this out, unthreading it right now. And I forgot the bottom hose is still connected. I got to take off the bottom hose first before I can pull the surge tank out. Here's the hose I'm trying to take off. Comes out the top of the water pump. That's the inlet to the water pump, and that goes to the bottom of the surge tank where it draws coolant from. So I'm going to pop the hose clamp off the back here. Whenever I do hose clamps, I always try to put the head that tightens them in a spot that's not visible, so it looks very clean. All you can see from the front's just the band. Much better than I thought. It's actually dry, so the stuff did drain straight through the pump. Now it's time number two. Now that the surge tank is disconnected from the pump, because it's way too hard to get this clamp from the top. Pull that up, feed the bottom hose through underneath the hybrid racing intake. A little tricky, but here we are. That's the bottom of it, and the surge tank's out. Alright guys, so I'll show you in detail what I did here to mount this water pump. This is the aftercooler water pump. That's the harness for it. I made an aluminum bracket that actually used the same location as the horn right here. The horn is mounted right behind it, and that's the same bolt the horn mounts through. That's mounted to the P-clamp that holds the water pump. And then to strengthen it even further, I made another aluminum bracket that this bolt goes through two of them, and the P-clamp. And this other aluminum bracket's right behind. It's got a unique bend to it, and it mounts to the factory hole that's already there. And that's there for, up here you can see, that's right down there attached to the piece that attaches to the crash beam right here. This is your crash beam up front. It's very solid and robust. There's a nut on the back of there because the hole in the frame there is just a through hole. So just a bolt and a nut there. And it's hung off the horn here. Two custom bent pieces of aluminum there. Alright, so next thing I'm going to do is undo the barbed fitting here. Take the hose off that, which is directly supplied to the T. I'm going to take the Maf Sensor off. I'm also going to take the support bracket, the CTE support bracket off that mounts through the manifold with this bolt here. It mounts to another piece with this bolt and nut through there. And then I'm going to get the light down there. As you can see, it mounts all the way down there on the block of the engine. And there's been a lot of reports kind of with people online. I guess the most common place where bolts back out are this bolt here. And that bolt is threaded on the inside of the manifold. So if that bolt ever backs out, you're going to get a vacuum leak and a boost leak because the boost pressure is going to be blown out through that threaded hole. I've never had a problem with it, and I didn't even have to Loctite mine. I just torqued it down to the spec required. Never had an issue with that bolt backing out, so I don't understand really why it's happened to so many other people. It's been on my car for 4 years, and I've never touched that bolt in 4 years, and it's been completely fine. So this is the factory Maf Sensor right here. Just going to pop that out. I'm going to unthread it from the manifold. When I get the manifold out of the car, I don't feel like getting in there and angle with a screwdriver. Alright, so the support bracket is out. This is the part that mounts down in the bottom of the engine block. It's a 17mm head. If you go to reinstall this in the car, I'd advise loosening everything first. Alright, so this is one other thing I'm going to make a note of. This is the factory bracket where this harness is supposed to clip in. However, with the manifold hanging so low, you're not able to clip this back into that. So what I did was, it's very easy. I just wrapped a zip tie around this harness and into there, just to get it so you can get it a little lower to clear the blower. This piece here is just hanging freely, but this piece would clip into the factory RBC intake manifold support bracket. But I have it zip tied over here together with everything, so it doesn't have a chance to get anywhere it shouldn't. It's all held very tightly down there. So you do lose a couple factory mounting points for the harnesses when you install this kit. It's really nothing you can't overcome with a couple easy zip ties. Alright, next, before I go to take the manifold off and drop the coolant, I'm going to work on taking the factory Comtech tensioning bracket off and replace it with the OEM one. So far, I'm going to start by taking off these two nuts that control the slot adjustment for the belt. And there's a bolt back here, so those three need to come out. And then I'm just going to move this piece with all the pulleys on it. I'm going to move it to the side and then reattach it to that machined piece later. And this pulley system just slides off there easily like that. So this is just a neat little look at the tensioning system. That's the set screw that sets the height. And in this machined pocket, there it rides inside of this little pressed in ledge here, and the set screw pushes down on that piece, which raises the pulley bracket up and down in those slots. Alright, so next, to take this bracket off, I'm going to work on pulling these three bolts out. They're all 12mm heads. There's two bolts there, and then one right there in the center. And I believe that's all that needs to be taken. And I believe that's all that needs to be removed to take that piece out, but we'll find out here. So this bolt here is a through hole through this aluminum piece, and it's a through hole through this piece as well, and it threads way back into here. So that bolt holds this piece and this piece to the block here where the PCV valve is, and then it's that bolt and then the one inside the tensioner right down in there that need to come out, because they thread into here and then into there. So those two thread through this block and into there and there and secure the whole thing on. And the reason you got to take those off is because these bolts are so long that when you unthread them all the way, they hit into your VSA module and you can't get them out. So you have to put that together on your bench. I believe the CTE instructions go over that very clearly on how to put this whole thing together. So I'm probably jumping the gun trying to take it apart a little too quick here. So I'm going to go ahead and take the bolt out in there, and that should be the last thing holding this whole thing on. And then this piece will come off with it as well. Alright, so I just went back inside and refreshed my memory on the CTE instructions. The CTE PDF that comes with this thing to install is extremely comprehensive and extremely detailed. So I forgot, you got to take out this bolt holding this actual pulley to the tensioner. Once you remove that, there is a third bolt that holds all of this to the block, and that is hidden behind this way back there. It's the trickiest one to get to, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that off and then get to that last bolt. Alright, so this one here is a 14mm head. The only way to get to it is to use a regular wrench that's got an angle to it to get in there, because you can't fit a ratchet and socket. It'll hit the AC line right here.
So it's the only way to get on it is just like that. Alright, that came loose. Try to all get it off all. There we go. So you go. And you got this little washer. And here's your pulley. And that is off. Alright, now that we got that off, you can actually reach back and feel the bolt that's back here. You can feel it right back behind the tensioner there. I know it's not good lighting right now, but basically the bolt is right behind that cavity to the right. So you're not going to be able to see it, but you got to feel for it by hand. Get a socket in there with a little extension and see what you can do. Alright, so I got my little 1/4 inch ratchet, and I'm going to feel for this bolt back there. Alright, so where the ratchet is right there, you can see I'm on some kind of 12mm bolt. Like I said, you're going in blindly, so you're not going to be able to really tell, but I believe that's the only bolt in the area that we need to remove. Alright, so I put gloves on so I don't break my hands on this thing. There we go. Got it cracked loose. As you can see, now that it's loose, this whole thing is ready to come right out. Let's see if I can get my hand back in there. Alright, so I'm just loosening that last bolt, holding everything to the block. Alright, everything is loose now. Should be able to pull everything straight up. There we go. This whole assembly's out of the car. Finally, lots of room for activities again. Alright, so just to summarize, the three main things that hold these two blocks to the car, to the block down here, three main bolts that do that are this one here, and then the center one that goes straight through the center of the tensioner there. So when you have those and you look from the rear, those are the three locations that bolt into the car. This is the one that was really impossible to see. As you know, it's on the car like that, so it is there, it's hidden behind, but it's quite tough to get to. Here's your CTE tensioner all put back together. The only bolts CTE included that were extra, that you didn't reuse from the factory setup, are these two longer ones. So these can stay with the kit, but these ones right here, this one, and the one right out of here, these two, these were reused from the factory locations. So I'm going to hold on to those, put those aside for a second. And here is your factory idler pulley. I kept the bolts with mine, so we know these are the correct ones that go back onto the tensioner. Right here's the tensioner, and then these just bolt up like that in this location. So if you thread that in, so there you have your idler pulley bolted back to your tensioner system, and the two bolts that we just took from the CTE setup, they secure this back to the car because it doesn't need that extra length anymore, since you're not going through two plates, you're just going through one. So they drop right through there, and then this hole right back here. So there you go. Those are your two threads that will go back into the car. Alright, so now we can get in and we're ready to drain the coolant because we want to pull the blower manifold off. So I can go right from the top and get to the coolant drain. Make sure you have a bucket underneath. Alright, so once you got all your coolant draining, it goes a little quicker if you open the top radiator cap and let it vent through the top. It'll come shooting out a lot quicker, but be careful because you don't want to get it all under the underneath of your car. So I kind of let it trickle out at first, and then towards the halfway point I pull that off the top. Alright, so everything up top here is 12mm head bolts that hold the manifold to the head. So there's four up top. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the bottom there's one over here by the coolant drain. There's one right in the center of the manifold right there, and then there's one on the far side here. They're very easy to get to with the Comptech blower. So we're going to go ahead and remove those. Alright, those are all loose, and I'm just going to back them out with my hand now. This one in the center is a longer one. It's because it's got to go through the thickness of the manifold, so this is included with the CompTech kit. It's helpful if you have a magnetic pickup tool to get the other ones out of there. That one's long too. Two left up top here. And I believe that is it. The only thing keeping it stuck on there now is seal from the gasket. So this thing can completely come up now. Move the fuel rail harness out of the way. And your blower manifold's only held on with this coolant line here. You just got to pop that coolant line off, and that's it. Do this coolant line. This thing off. There you go. The fitting's off. And the blower manifold is out of the car. So now the Honda heat shield manifold gasket can be pulled up. And this has been reused twice already. I used this on my RBC, and then I used it on the Supercharger, and it still is completely fine. It doesn't have any leaks anywhere. Alright, so now's a great time to go ahead and inspect your valves. Mine all look pretty dang good. There's no discoloration or anything on them, so that shows me no coolant ever got to any of the valves. That everything was sealed off really nicely, and the runners in the head are still very clean. Last time before I installed the Supercharger, I cleaned everything out very, very well, and there wasn't too much buildup. So the catch cans, my little air oil separators, must have been doing a pretty good job to keep oil out of the intake. Right on the CT manifold here. This is the stock Maf Sensor. What you're going to do is, it's the factory Phillips head screw that holds it in. Just take that out. And just wiggle the sensor out. Careful not to damage the O-ring, because that will cause a vacuum leak or a boost leak. There's the factory Maf Sensor out of the blower, and the blower is now officially completely stripped. Here's a close-up view of the porting work and the smoothing out the runners that we did. Each runner is smoothed out because the castings from these, when you get these from CT, are pretty rough on the insides. The runners have more of a texture like the inside of here, and you can see how rough it is on the inside, but it doesn't affect flow down there. But when you get up to the runners, it will start to affect flow. So those have all been smoothed out and polished on each runner all the way down.